So I became quite interested in Brazil, and then became fascinated when I saw a documentary on street kids in about 1989, World in Action or something like that. I couldn't believe how these little warriors were sort of surviving on the street, and they were pretty much, you know, a few years younger than me. And they were presented as victims, but to me they seemed like heroes because they were just amazing the way that they survived. So I became quite fascinated by that whole idea of kids fending for themselves on the street who were, in those days, I guess I was 16 then, and these kids were 14, 13.
Right.
So that kind of stayed in my mind, and then I got to university and I ended up doing my dissertation for an anthropology degree in Brazil, in Recife, and I worked with the National Movement for Street Kids. And I'd been boxing as an amateur. I was about 17, and I actually won the British Universities Championships, and I was quite into my boxing. I was boxing as much as I was studying, really. And I found myself in Recife working for the National Movement of Street Kids, and we couldn't get these street kids to put the glue bottles down, no matter what we did. And then one of them found out that I was training, I was keeping fit, and I was shadowboxing. He goes, "Oh, you're boxing?" I went, "Oh, you know, I box as an amateur." And he was, "Oh, show me some moves." And I was like, "Right, come here." And I'm sort of putting him in the position, and suddenly they all put down their cola bottles without being asked to, which hadn't happened in about 5 months. And started like practicing, and that's, I guess, where Fight for Peace was born, because it was this idea, well, hang on a second, boxing maybe officially within the voluntary sector has never been used to attract kids in order to have sort of some sort of discourse with them. But on the other hand, if you actually think about boxing clubs, they've always been social projects by fault rather than by. Often sort of lost young men, young boys who are need a father figure type or a mentor or a coach, or need discipline or need something to focus on, who aren't doing very well at school, and the rest of it tend to go to those places. So Fight for Peace was born then. The name wasn't, but the concept, I think, was. So, you know, as I was already working, we're doing research on the police assassination of street kids for university, and together with the national movement. And then I became very involved because a number of kids that I knew were murdered. But luta means to fight for your rights, as well as an organised fight like capoeira or jiu-jitsu or boxing. And brigar is the verb to fight, like a street fight. So already in Portuguese it's a bit more subtle than it's translated in English, because we don't have a differentiation for the fight, for the verb to fight, which is fight for your rights, fight for, you know, justice or fight in the street. I'd looked at 3 or 4 different favelas, and Maré was one that was extremely complex. It's controlled by the 3 big drug factions, and so there are lines that no one crosses, and everyone is subjugated to an extent by them. I mean, there are openly armed gangsters walking around in the street in the evenings, and it became clear that, you know, if Fight for Peace was going to work anywhere, it was going to work there. So I made contact through the trustee board of the organisation I was volunteering at with community leaders here, and found a small space and opened it in a back room with 10 kids, and that was 7 years ago, and it's now sort of grown to this building here. Five Piece is now the 5 pillars, which it never used to be, which again grew. And it grew in 2 ways. One, listening to the young people on the project about what they needed in their lives. Once we had a platform to have discourse with them, which was through a boxing club, and having regular discussions. And secondly, through more theoretical research that I was carrying out about kids' involvement in drug trafficking. There was an ethnographic study that was published in 2003 I hung out with drug traffickers for a couple of years and kind of interviewed them and work out why they did what they did when they knew that the gun death rates were so bad. I mean, we compared in absolute terms, there are more kids being killed here in any period than in Israel and Palestine, in the city of Rio. We compared 8 war situations over about a 14-year period in the 80s and the 90s, and Rio de Janeiro as a city was worse than all of them, including the Colombian Civil War. All of the kids I interviewed for the study said they expected to be dead by the time they were 18 or 19. So I was trying to understand what choices they were making, and really putting the ball back in their court to a certain extent, and saying, well, all right, well, if you've got enough agency to make a decision at the age of 10 about getting involved in drug trafficking, then you must surely have the ability to make a decision not to get involved. And so 5 Piece was about learning how to create an environment where that decision would be encouraged, not forced or not even led, because to the end of the day there's a big phrase in drug trafficking is that you can't take anyone out of drug trafficking, they have to take themselves out, they have to want to leave. And both on a preventative level and a level of rehabilitation, what environment do you need to create to stimulate that? And so the 5 pillars were born out of listening to the young people, doing theoretical research, and coming to a kind of more strategic outlook about what we were calling personal contexts. So the idea was to chart the drivers and look at why in certain environments, at all levels of a young person's interaction, family, peer group, community and society, what are the drivers that will make them, that will be risk factors to a certain extent, in which being part of a criminal group or a gang is a way to respond to those drivers, respond to those risk factors in an active way, because those are your options and those are certain influences that you have in your life. Yeah. Because if you can understand why kids are making that choice, then you can understand what makes them vulnerable, and then you can build resilience, because you can say, well, if you're having problems at home, then what can we do to stimulate better relations in your family? If you're having problems with learning difficulties, well, how can we help so that you can be more comfortable at school? How can we chart all of those potential problems in an individual life? So it's about trying to make a program that's got 800 kids in it a year, but at the same time is personalised, which is a challenge. Basically, Fight for Peace says, here's a structure, let's look at the individual within that structure and let's chart where they could be seen as resilient. And the 5 basic pillars are boxing and martial arts, because what that does is it brings kids through the door, number 1. Number 2, it gives identity, and let's face it, all young people are looking for identity. And it's also because you can't do drugs when you do boxing, right? And so you start having to change your life pattern, because you go to bed early because you've got to get up to go training at 6 o'clock the next morning and all the rest of it. So it starts, and you start changing your peer group. Also, you're put in a position where your identity can be worn like a badge publicly, because we put on boxing shows in the community here. You've got 3,000 kids coming out to watch you box. All the drug traffickers locally are watching that. Everyone's watching that. You're seen as a lutador, you're a fighter now, and that's an advantage we have here because it's such a small community, right? So the importance of boxing as identity and dedication, and getting the kids through the door and keeping an ongoing contact with them through something that they enjoy and that's healthy and as a sport. Secondly, and these 5 pillars grew up because of listening to the needs of these young kids. Well, education is something that's seen very much for the long term and for the future, but it's very difficult to convince kids who are looking for an immediate return that education is a good idea, because it doesn't really make much sense, especially if you're living in a favela where you think you're never going to get a job anyway. So we provide educational support here, and a lot of the time through the citizenship classes or personal development classes that we do once a week that the kids have to go to in order to access the boxing, there are ongoing discussions about the importance of education. It's just constant reinforcing of that. We've got sport or boxing for identity, education for a future, and constantly reinforcing about the importance of that and providing that. I think computers have helped a lot with that, because, as we were saying yesterday, you can touch them and you can feel them, and it's technology, it's exciting, and then the screen never looks the same.
You can understand your own learning very quickly.
Right, exactly. And then access to the work market, to try and think about actually getting money in your pocket, especially when you start hitting 15, 16. And then the psychosocial support comes through referral work very much, but also through working with the family. So we do home visits, parental visits. We try and build relations between the young people and the families if they're having difficulties, because that is so key to making a decision about whether you get involved in crime or not. And number 5 is youth leadership, and that's about protagonism. So in the same way as young people become excellent boxers, it's about having a balance about that, because of those 5 or 6 members of the youth council you met yesterday, only one of them's a decent boxer.
Right.
So one of them's on the wrestling team, but he's only been dating 6 months. Not.
Right.
And it's about saying, no, you can be respected in this environment for other reasons. It's not just about sport. And so it's a combination of these 5 things, which we believe, if are delivered in a personalised way, you end up boosting resilience and you end up lessening vulnerability. We needed the young people to be part of our structure, and to help us make sure that we got the programme right. And one way of doing that was to have a voice that was an official voice, which would kind of be an intermediary, but that had to be involved in everything, with the exception of maybe pay rise discussions. They're pretty much in everything. To the point that when we've just signed the new, because we've just become an NGO, having been a project of a bigger Brazilian NGO, we've now become independent as of this week.
Congratulations.
Thank you, yeah. It's very exciting, very terrifying, because we've only got 45% of next year's budget sorted out. But anyway, the conselheiros, which were the trustees, 3 of the trustees are kids from the project and kids from the council. And we take it that seriously, that they're signing as legal representatives of this organisation. And we're taking it so seriously that one of the articles of the charity is that they should be the public speakers that represent this project. So I can do this because I can speak in English, but when the media comes, the ones that should be dealing with the media are the young people from the project. We're allowed to do it as well, but they should be in the forefront. Right. When we go to seminars, they should be in the forefront. When we go to this, that and the other, they should be the ones speaking on behalf of the project. So they need to represent the project, they need to be integral to the project. And there's stuff that they don't know how to do, which, obviously if you don't have a degree and you haven't got 15 years work experience in administration, you're not going to know how to do. But even in those areas, pretty much every one of our professionals has a young person working alongside them, trying to bring them through. We're good at what we do, we're aware of our worth, or the kids are, and they are the ones that have to be taken forward. I know this just sounds a little bit conceptual, maybe not making much sense. What I mean by that is we've discovered what it is we're good at, and we're now going to take it to the marketplace so that we can get paid, so that these centres can be funded, and so that we can have as many centres as we need. We were talking about this earlier. I don't believe in charity. I don't think there's anything wrong with people helping. I think charitable aspirations of helping other people who are in need are crucial to any society and are fundamentally should be applauded and recognised. What I can't stand is systematic charity, whereby those that have think that giving 3 to 10% is enough for them to continue doing the bullshit that they're doing, and society never changes. So what we're doing now is launching a brand, and we're going to see how we can play in that. And I believe that the brand we have is golden because it's very authentic, and I think young people smell authenticity. Credibility is real, and that's why people like Nike latch on to sports stars, because they're credible, because they've really done it. And the reason that this whole thing happened is because we've had sports stars in here, we've had music stars in here, we've had people who are desperate to wear the T-shirt. And it's like, well, hang on a second. Well, but it's not, and it's very important, it's not an Oxfam T-shirt. And it's not about saying to people, buy this and you're helping. That's a byproduct of what this all stands for, because it's not about presenting kids as victims, it's about presenting them as heroes. And that goes back to that original documentary I saw in 1986 when I looked at those street kids and I went, that's a hero.